There is a question many men carry in silence. They rarely say it out loud, but it echoes late at night, after another rejection, another unanswered message, another moment of doubt. If I control myself, if I choose discipline, if I refuse to chase pleasure at any cost, does that make me weak? Or worse, invisible? In a culture obsessed with instant gratification, where attention is currency and desire is measured by external approval, self-control often looks suspicious. Restraint is mistaken for insecurity, silence is confused with fear, and discipline is often misunderstood as a lack of options. But what if the real problem is not discipline at all? What if the real problem is why it exists in the first place? Stoicism offers a brutal but liberating answer, not by asking what others value, but by forcing us to confront something far more uncomfortable: our intentions, our motives, and the quiet bargains we make with our own fears. Stoic philosophy was never designed to make you attractive. It was designed to make you unbreakable. And paradoxically, it is precisely this inner strength that reshapes how the world responds to you. According to Epictetus, the moment a man becomes dependent on external approval, he hands his freedom to forces he cannot control. Epictetus warned, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. This idea cuts directly against modern conditioning. We are taught to optimize ourselves for approval, likes, validation, attraction. The Stoics taught the opposite. Build character first. Let the rest follow, or not. That is what this video is about. Not about women, not about dating tactics, not about performing an image. This is about understanding the difference between discipline born from strength and restraint born from fear, and why the world responds very differently to each. Welcome to the Stoic Lighthouse, a place where ancient wisdom illuminates modern confusion. Let the Stoic Lighthouse guide you toward peace and wisdom. If this kind of clarity matters to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You are building more than habits here. You are building an inner foundation. Now, let us dismantle the question itself and expose why chasing validation quietly destroys the very strength men seek to project. Number 1. The wrong question. Why seeking validation weakens you? The question itself is already a trap. When a man asks why others do not value his choices, he has quietly accepted a dangerous premise: that his worth must be confirmed from the outside, that his actions only matter if they are rewarded with approval, desire, or recognition. From a Stoic perspective, this mindset is not just misguided, it is corrosive. Stoicism begins with a hard truth that modern culture resists. You do not control how others see you. You do not control what they desire, admire, or dismiss. And the moment you shape your behavior around those outcomes, you surrender your autonomy. Epictetus understood this with brutal clarity. Born into slavery, he experienced firsthand what it meant to be judged, ignored, and dismissed by others. Yet his philosophy was built on a radical internal rebellion. According to Epictetus, if you seek progress, stop trying to appear wise, seek to be free. Freedom, for the Stoic, does not mean doing whatever you want. It means acting according to reason and principle, regardless of applause or rejection. When validation becomes the goal, character becomes conditional. Your discipline exists only as long as it is rewarded. Your restraint collapses the moment it is questioned. Your confidence rises and falls with opinions you cannot control. This is why the Stoics saw external approval as dangerous. Not because admiration is bad, but because dependence on it makes you fragile. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly warned himself about this inner weakness while holding absolute power. Surrounded by praise, fear, and manipulation, he recognized that admiration can be as enslaving as criticism. Marcus Aurelius reflected how much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does. This is not emotional detachment. It is psychological sovereignty. Modern life amplifies the opposite impulse. Social media trains men to measure their value numerically. Matches, messages, attention. Each interaction becomes a referendum on self-worth. Stoicism cuts through this illusion. It reminds us that asking to be valued is already a confession of dependence. William B. Irvine, interpreting Stoic thought for the modern world, explains that peace comes not from controlling outcomes, but from redirecting desire itself. According to William B. Irvine, when we stop craving approval, we reclaim control over our emotional lives. The Stoic does not ask, "How do I become desirable?" He asks, "Is this action consistent with reason, courage, justice, and self-mastery?" If the answer is yes, the action stands. If the world approves, that is incidental. If it does not, nothing essential is lost. The real danger is not being rejected. The real danger is building a life where your sense of worth depends on not being rejected. The moment you stop negotiating your principles for validation, something subtle changes. Your posture shifts, your decisions gain weight, and whether others notice or not becomes irrelevant. That is where Stoic strength begins. Number 2, virtue or fear, what really drives your self-control. Stoicism judges actions by their source, not by their appearance. Two men can behave the same way on the surface and live in entirely different moral realities beneath it. Both may practice restraint. Both may avoid indulgence. Both may appear disciplined. But one acts from strength, the other from fear. This distinction is essential because Stoicism is not a philosophy of behavior. It is a philosophy of intention. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, taught that virtue is not about suppressing desire blindly, but about aligning desire with reason. Self-control that flows from reason is freedom. Self-control that flows from anxiety is captivity. According to Zeno, a wise person desires only what is in harmony with reason. This is where many men become confused. They assume restraint itself is virtuous. The Stoics would strongly disagree. Restraint becomes virtue only when it is chosen freely. When a man has the capacity to act, the confidence to engage, and the opportunity to pursue pleasure, yet consciously decides otherwise for a higher purpose, that is temperance, that is strength. Chrysippus, who systematized Stoic ethics, emphasized that virtue requires agency. Without choice, there is no moral excellence, only circumstance. Chrysippus argued, virtue exists only where the will is free to choose. Now contrast this with restraint driven by fear, fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of exposure, fear of failure. In this case, restraint is not a decision, it is avoidance. The man does not refrain because he chooses discipline. He refrains because he does not believe he can act without being harmed. His body retreats, his voice softens, his posture contracts. Stoicism would not call this virtue. It would call it a signal that courage has not yet been trained. According to Seneca, fear distorts judgment and creates the illusion that inaction is safety. Seneca warned, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Avoidance feels like control, but it is not. It is a surrender disguised as prudence. Modern psychology mirrors this Stoic insight. Edith Eger, who survived extreme trauma and later studied human resilience, explains that freedom is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move despite it. According to Edith Eger, freedom is not about avoiding pain. It is about choosing how we respond to it. This is the dividing line. Discipline rooted in virtue expands you. Discipline rooted in fear shrinks you. One builds presence, the other leaks insecurity. And whether we like it or not, human beings are remarkably sensitive to this difference. They may not articulate it consciously, but they feel it immediately. Stoicism never encouraged men to suppress desire out of shame. It demanded that they confront desire directly and decide rationally what role it would play in their lives. A man who governs himself because he can is fundamentally different from a man who withdraws because he is afraid. Only one of them is free. Number 3. Choice versus inaction. The silent signals. People instinctively read. Human beings are not attracted to behaviors. They are drawn to signals. Long before logic intervenes, the nervous system is already reading posture, tone, decisiveness, and emotional presence. Strength and weakness are perceived intuitively, often without a single word being exchanged. Stoicism understood this centuries before modern psychology gave it language. When self-control is chosen freely, it sends a powerful signal. It communicates abundance rather than scarcity, agency rather than hesitation, direction rather than drift. A man who chooses restraint from a position of strength does not appear closed off. He appears grounded. His presence is calm, not tense. His silence is intentional, not defensive. Marcus Aurelius observed that true power is internal governance, not domination of others. Marcus Aurelius reflected, "He who rules himself is stronger than he who conquers cities." This form of self-rule creates coherence. Thoughts align with actions. Actions align with values. There is no internal negotiation happening in public view. In contrast, inaction driven by fear broadcasts a very different message. The body contracts, eye contact weakens. Speech becomes cautious, filtered, hesitant. There is an unspoken request for permission that hangs in the air. Stoicism viewed courage as the bridge between thought and action. Without courage, even good intentions decay into passivity. According to Seneca, fear paralyzes not because danger is real, but because judgment becomes distorted. Seneca explained, "It is not that things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." Modern research confirms what the Stoics intuited. People are not repelled by vulnerability. They are repelled by avoidance. Brené Brown's work on courage and connection echoes this ancient insight with modern clarity. According to Brené Brown, vulnerability is not weakness. It is the most accurate measure of courage. Choosing to act, even when the outcome is uncertain, signals inner stability. Withdrawing to avoid discomfort signals inner conflict. One says, "I can face reality." The other says, "Reality is too much for me." This is why two men practicing identical restraint can be perceived so differently. One radiates self-trust, the other radiates self-doubt. Stoicism never promised comfort, it promised alignment. A man aligned with his values moves through the world with a quiet certainty. He does not need to prove himself. He does not need to perform strength. His choices speak for him. The world does not respond to what you claim to be. It responds to what your actions consistently reveal. And actions shaped by choice always speak louder than silence shaped by fear. Number 4, becoming a man of value. Mastering what is truly under your control. Stoicism offers a simple but demanding solution. Stop trying to be valued. Start becoming valuable. This shift sounds subtle, but it changes everything. A man who seeks validation places his life in negotiation. His mood depends on reactions. His confidence rises and collapses based on outcomes he does not command. He is always responding, rarely directing. The Stoic does the opposite. He withdraws his attention from what he cannot control and concentrates it mercilessly on what he can. This principle sits at the center of Stoic practice. Epictetus made this boundary unmistakably clear. According to Epictetus, some things are up to us and some things are not. Reputation is not up to you. Attraction is not up to you. Approval is not up to you. Character is. The Stoic solution is not to become indifferent to life, but to become disciplined about where energy is invested. Instead of asking how to be admired, the Stoic asks how to become internally ordered. This process is not abstract. It is built through daily, unglamorous effort. First, courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is movement in its presence. Stoicism treats courage as a trained response. A man repeatedly places himself in situations where rejection, discomfort, or uncertainty are possible, not recklessly, deliberately. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that avoidance weakens the soul more than failure ever could. Marcus Aurelius reflected, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Each time a man chooses action over retreat, he deposits evidence into his own nervous system, evidence that he can withstand reality. Second, wisdom, not intelligence, judgment. The Stoic studies not to impress but to see clearly. He learns to distinguish what matters from what distracts, what strengthens him from what numbs him. Chrysippus believed ignorance was not neutral, but actively destructive. According to Chrysippus, error is not harmless. It is the root of every disturbance of the soul. A man who sharpens his judgment becomes harder to manipulate, harder to destabilize, harder to deceive. That stability radiates outward. Third, justice. Justice is not moral signaling, it is reliability. The Stoic becomes someone whose word carries weight, who does what he says, who treats others fairly without negotiating for advantage. Musonius Rufus taught that character is revealed not in moments of power but in ordinary conduct. According to Musonius Rufus, one should practice virtue in the small things, for this is how it becomes firm in the great ones. Reputation, when it comes, emerges naturally from this consistency. It cannot be faked or rushed. Finally, temperance, the mastery of impulse. Temperance does not suppress desire, it governs it. A man who can enjoy pleasure without being ruled by it communicates inner authority. Food, comfort, sex, status, none of these command him. William B. Irvine explains that this restraint is not deprivation, but strategic freedom. According to William B. Irvine, self-control is not about denying pleasure, it is about preventing pleasure from controlling us. This is how a man becomes valuable, not through performance, not through image, but through alignment. When courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance reinforce one another, something stabilizes. The need for validation dissolves, and with it, the quiet desperation that others instinctively sense. The Stoic does not chase approval. He builds a life that no longer depends on it. At the end of this reflection, one truth becomes unavoidable. The problem was never discipline, and it was never restraint. The real issue has always been the source. When self-control is driven by fear, it shrinks the soul. When it is driven by choice, it strengthens it. Stoicism never asked men to be admired. It asked them to be ordered within. A man who governs himself no longer negotiates his worth with the world. He does not wait to be chosen. He does not measure himself through attention or approval. His value is not borrowed, it is built. This is why Stoicism insists that character comes before outcomes, because outcomes fluctuate, opinions shift, desire fades, but a man aligned with courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance carries his center with him, and from that center, everything else becomes secondary. Now I want to hear from you. How did this perspective challenge the way you think about discipline, attraction, and self-worth? What is one area of your life where you realized you have been acting from fear instead of choice? Share your reflection in the comments. Your insight adds depth to this community. If this video brought you clarity, take a moment to like it, share it with someone who may be trapped in the search for validation, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what comes next. The Stoic Lighthouse exists to cut through confusion and return you to what truly matters. In the next video, we will place one of the most influential figures in human history under the lens of Stoic judgment, not through theology, not through belief, but through reason, virtue, and moral responsibility. The verdict may challenge what you think you know and force a deeper question about strength, sacrifice, and inner freedom. We close with a thought that captures the essence of everything discussed here. According to Ralph Waldo Emerson, "What you are speaks so loudly that I cannot hear what you say." See you in the next video.